Join me as I explore some of the most jaw-dropping abandoned places out there, and I'll see if I can keep my cool while uncovering their secrets. There's something undeniably eerie, yet captivating about abandoned places. They have a way of transporting us to another time, whispering secrets of the past, and leaving us wondering what really went down. The crumbling walls, the overgrown gardens, and the rusty machinery all tell a story of human dreams, struggles, and triumphs. You see, most abandoned places share a common thread, a reason why they were left behind. Sometimes it's economic decline, where a once thriving industry dried up, leaving behind a ghost town. Other times, it's natural disasters that forced people to flee, or urban decay that slowly sucked the life out of a community. Then there are the times when human error, or even malevolence, played a role in the abandonment. Whatever the reason, one thing's for sure: these places are steeped in history, and the stories they tell are nothing short of fascinating. Take, for instance, the town of Centralia, Pennsylvania. This place was abandoned due to a coal mine fire that's been burning since the 1960s. Yes, you heard that right. The 1960s. The flames have been raging for over 50 years, and the poisonous gases and smoke have made the town uninhabitable. Today, the streets are empty, the houses are crumbling, and the only sign of life is the smoke billowing out of the ground. Or how about the Sanzi UFO houses in Taiwan? These pod-like structures were meant to be a luxury resort, but the project was abandoned after a series of fatal accidents. Today, they stand as a testament to the power of nature, with vines and trees reclaiming the land. Another stunning example is the abandoned city of Pripyat in Ukraine. This place was evacuated overnight after the Chernobyl nuclear disaster in 1986. Today, the city remains frozen in time, with toys still lying on the streets and personal belongings left behind in the hurry to escape. But there's one abandoned place that truly leaves me speechless: the saline plantation in Turks and Caicos. This place was once a thriving salt farm, but it was abandoned after a devastating hurricane hit the island. Today, the rusting machinery stands still, surrounded by a sea of crystal-clear water and coral reefs. It's like stumbling upon an alien landscape, with the bright turquoise water and the skeletal remains of the machinery creating an otherworldly atmosphere. As we've seen, abandoned places have a way of captivating our imagination and tugging at our heartstrings. They remind us of the power of nature, the fallibility of human endeavors, and the importance of preserving our history. Thanks for joining me on this journey into the unknown. If you have a favorite abandoned place that didn't make it onto this list, let me know in the comments below. And if you want more content like this, be sure to check out my other videos and subscribe for more adventures into the world of the weird and wonderful. Part 1. The Watcher of All Angels Grove. They called it the Angels Grove, though if there were ever angels there, they'd long since abandoned the place. Most folks barely knew about it. Others insisted it was just a bit of overgrown woodlands and rubble, a place better forgotten. Some even claimed it was protected, buried by the town's secrets and left to rot. To me, it was something different altogether. It was a place of mystery and morbid beauty, a part of the world everyone else feared, yet one that kept whispering to me, a siren's call to a darkness I couldn't ignore. I'd stumbled upon it by accident one late autumn afternoon, the last of the daylight trickling through a mist that seemed almost alive, weaving between the trees like a ghostly ribbon. It was chilly, dead quiet, the kind of silence that fills your ears and unsettles your senses. They said Angel's Grove was an old burial ground, once a place of worship, though for what, no one could say. The tales were varied, twisted into incoherent fragments, as if the town itself had tried to purge them from memory. But one story remained consistent: no one was allowed to step foot inside. And I, being as drawn to the forbiddens as I was to my next breath, felt my curiosity stirring like a living, breathing thing. What started as a cautious curiosity soon became an obsession. I'd circle the grove at a distance, lingering longer than any sane person would, searching for something. Shadows moved in strange ways there. The leaves seemed darker, denser, even on bright days. Time felt different there, dragging like thick molasses. One day, I finally ventured in. I didn't tell anyone. Why would I? If I were to admit it, people would call me mad or a fool, maybe worse. But I had to know what lay beyond the veil of trees. I had to see what they didn't want me to see. Part 2. The Broken Statues. The air changed as soon as I stepped past the first line of trees. It felt heavier, thick with the smell of decay and moss, pressing in on me like an invisible weight. Shadows seemed to ripple and shift with each step, as if the trees themselves were bending to watch. I told myself it was just my nerves, but there was something there, something far more tangible than fear. The deeper I walked, the denser the woods became, crowding together in ways that didn't seem natural. The mist hung low to the ground, winding through tree roots that jutted from the earth like the skeletal remains of something ancient, long forgotten. My footsteps fell quietly, muffled by the carpet of dead leaves. Yet every sound seemed amplified, the snapping of a twig, the brushing of my jacket against branches, all echoing through the silence, as if the grove was swallowing every sound. And then I saw them. The statues were almost invisible at first, obscured by vines and moss. They stood like sentinels among the trees, eroded beyond recognition, their faces smoothed and featureless. They looked like figures in anguish, twisted and contorted as if frozen in some moment of intense pain. Some had broken limbs, arms reaching out in silent screams. Others were missing entire faces, their hollow heads staring at nothing. The statues seemed endless, scattered across the grove in strange patterns, each one caught in a moment of torment. As I walked closer, I felt an odd sensation crawling up my spine, a prickling, like 100 tiny needles pressing against my skin. I knew then that they hadn't always been this way. Someone or something had disfigured them, twisted them into grotesque shapes. They felt wrong, as if they'd once been human, frozen mid-scream, pleading for release. I kept walking, deeper into the grove, and soon I noticed something else. The statues weren't alone. There were remnants of structures' pillars, crumbling into heaps of rubble, archways with symbols I didn't recognize. The stones bore strange carvings, symbols that seemed to shift under my gaze, ancient marks that pulsed with a dark energy I couldn't quite explain. And each one was stained a deep, rusty red, almost as if the stones had been soaked in blood. In the heart of the grove, standing tall among the ruins, was the largest statue. Unlike the others, it was intact, towering over the broken figures like a deity presiding over the damned. It wore a crown of thorns, and its arms stretched outward, palms open as if offering something invisible to the sky. Its face was the only one not eroded, and though I could barely make out its features, there was a look of agony in its stone eyes, a pain so intense that I could feel it radiating from the cold rock. And then, for the briefest of moments, I swear I saw it move. Part 3. The Whispering Voices. My breath caught and I froze, staring at the massive statue as my mind scrambled to rationalize what I'd just seen. The statue's eyes, hollow and lifeless, seemed to flicker with some dark spark. But it wasn't just that its stone lips had parted, just a fraction, as if caught in a silent gasp. And then I heard it. A faint, whispering voice drifted through the grove, its sound soft, almost pleading, carried by a chill breeze that cut through the stillness. The words were indistinct, but the tone, deep and mournful, was unmistakable. It was a voice of sorrow, thick with regret, like the sound of a confession that had been waiting for centuries to be heard. I spun around, expecting to see someone behind me, but there was nothing. Just rows of statues, each staring blindly ahead, their twisted forms eerily still. The voice grew louder, still indistinct, its words just out of reach, like a language forgotten by time. And then it wasn't alone. Other whispers joined in, layering over each other, forming a chorus of murmurs that seemed to come from every direction, filling the grove with a chilling, oppressive hum. The whispers rose and fell in waves, growing louder, then fading, like the ebb and flow of some dark ocean surrounding me. I backed up, my heart hammering in my chest, desperate to escape the grove and its cacophony of sorrowful voices. But my feet wouldn't obey me. I couldn't move. Something rooted me to the spot, a force that held me as firmly as if the earth itself had reached up and clamped around my legs. The whispers were calling to me now, a chant that pulsed through the air, growing louder, more desperate, as if begging me to listen. They were words, just faint enough to be heard, yet too garbled to understand. But one phrase repeated itself again and again, a desperate plea buried beneath the layers of voices. Remember us. Remember us. I reached up, covering my ears, but the sound only grew louder, vibrating in my skull, as though the voices had crawled inside my mind. And then, one of the whispers separated from the others, a single voice, clearer, sharper, filled with something darker than sorrow. Its words slid through the air like oil, cold and slick, dripping with malice. "Why did you come here?" it asked. A chill raced down my spine, and I finally managed to turn, stumbling as I tried to move away. But everywhere I looked, statues stared back at me, their eyeless faces twisted with grief and rage. The air felt thicker, pressing against my skin, making it harder to breathe, like the grove itself was closing in, pulling me deeper. "Why did you come here?" the voice repeated, louder this time, dripping with accusation, as if it knew why I'd come, as if it could see the dark curiosity that had drawn me in. I tried to respond, to explain that I hadn't meant to intrude, that I'd just been curious, but the words stuck in my throat. My heart was pounding so loudly, I could barely think, and the voice seemed to echo through my entire body, like it was inside me, clawing its way into my soul. In my panic, my gaze fell back on the massive statue at the center of the grove. Its arms were still stretched outward, its expression frozen in anguish, but something had changed. Its eyes were open now wide, piercing, staring straight at me. And then I realized, with a sickening lurch in my stomach, that the statue wasn't just looking at me. It was watching me. I stumbled backward, heart racing as the statue's eyes seemed to follow me, tracking my every move. The whispers grew louder, more frantic, filling my head with a chorus of voices that seemed to scream in unison. I pressed my hands to my ears, but it was useless. The voices were inside me, clawing at my mind, pulling me deeper into their agony. And then, in a voice that was as cold and hollow as death itself, the statue spoke. "You shouldn't have come here," it said. The sound was like stone grinding against stone, a low, guttural rumble that reverberated through my bones, leaving a chill that seeped into my very core. I turned to run, finally breaking free from the invisible force that had held me. The grove spun around me, the trees blurring as I stumbled blindly through the undergrowth, desperate to escape. But the whispers followed me, filling the air with their desperate pleas, growing louder with every step, until they were all I could hear, a cacophony of voices begging for release. And behind them, louder than all the others, was the voice of the statue, cold and accusing, echoing in my mind as I fled. You shouldn't have come here. Part 4. The Shadows That Move. I ran, pushing through the tangled undergrowth, my breath coming in shallow gasps. Every step felt like a struggle, as if the earth itself was clinging to my legs, slowing me down. The statues seemed to be everywhere now, their twisted forms crowding the path, blocking my way, forcing me to weave between them. Each face I passed seemed more anguished than the last, their hollow eyes staring into mine, mouths open in silent screams that I couldn't escape. They were begging me, demanding something I didn't understand. The whispers followed, a relentless tide of sorrow and rage, their voices twisting around each other in a horrific symphony. The grove itself felt alive, its trees looming over me, branches clawing at my arms and face as I stumbled forward. I glanced over my shoulder, half expecting to see something chasing me. But the grove was empty, just rows upon rows of statues, all watching me with their dead, sightless eyes. Then I saw it. At the edge of my vision, a shadow moved, slipping between the trees like smoke. It was there, just for a second, a dark, amorphous shape that melted into the shadows as soon as I looked. I froze, my heart pounding in my chest, scanning the trees for any sign of movement. But there was nothing, just the cold, empty silence of the grove. I kept running, pushing myself forward, trying to ignore the creeping sensation that I was being watched. But the shadow kept appearing, always just at the edge of my vision, slipping between the trees with a silent, predatory grace. It was following me, stalking me through the grove, and no matter how fast I ran, it always stayed just out of reach, lurking in the shadows. My foot caught on something, and I stumbled, nearly falling to the ground. I looked down, and my stomach twisted at the sight. It was a statue half buried in the earth, its face twisted into a look of pure terror. Its arms were outstretched, as if reaching for something, and its eyes seemed to follow me, pleading silently for help. I stepped back, my heart racing, and that's when I saw it. The ground around the statue was covered in small, dark shapes bones, scattered haphazardly across the earth, their edges worn smooth by time. I crouched down, reaching out with trembling fingers to touch one of them, and felt a sickening chill crawl up my spine. They were human. Tiny, delicate bones, some no bigger than my thumb, others long and slender, like ribs or fingers. A cold, hollow dread settled over me, and I backed away, stumbling over roots and stones as I tried to put as much distance as possible between myself and the bones. But everywhere I looked, there were more of them scattered among the trees, half buried in the earth, a graveyard hidden beneath the fallen leaves. I realized, with a sickening certainty, that the grove wasn't just a place of statues and ruins. It was a place of death, a burial ground for the lost and forgotten, and I was walking through the remains of those who had come before me. The shadow moved again, closer this time, slipping between the trees like a silent predator. I froze, my breath catching in my throat as I watched it glide through the grove, its shape shifting and changing with each step. It didn't have a face, didn't have eyes, yet I could feel it watching me, studying me with a dark, hungry gaze. I turned to run, but the ground seemed to shift beneath my feet, pulling me back towards the heart of the grove. The statues were closer now, crowding around me, their twisted forms reaching out with skeletal hands, as if trying to pull me into their cold stone embrace. I stumbled, tripping over a root, and fell to my knees, my hands sinking into the damp earth. The whispers were louder now, filling my ears with their desperate pleas, their voices mingling with the sound of my own ragged breathing. I tried to stand, but something held me down, a weight pressing on my shoulders, a cold, invisible hand that kept me pinned to the ground. I looked up, and my heart stopped. The shadow was there, standing just a few feet away, its shape dark and shifting, like smoke given form. It leaned closer, its presence pressing against me, suffocating me with its cold, dark energy. I couldn't move, couldn't breathe, as it stared into my soul with an intensity that left me paralyzed. "Why did you come here?" it asked, its voice a hollow whisper that echoed in my mind. I wanted to scream, to beg for forgiveness, but the words wouldn't come. I could feel it reaching into me, searching through my mind, pulling at my darkest memories, my deepest fears. It was sifting through my soul, peeling back layers of myself like pages in a book, and I was powerless to stop it. The whispers grew louder, more frantic, filling the air with a desperation that made my skin crawl. They were begging me, pleading for something I couldn't understand, and I could feel their pain, their sorrow, as if it were my own. The weight on my shoulders grew heavier, pressing me down into the earth, and I knew, with a sickening certainty, that I was going to die here, trapped in this place of shadows and whispers, buried among the bones of the forgotten. But then, just as the darkness began to close in around me, I felt something shift, a warmth spreading through my chest, a light that pushed back against the shadow's cold embrace. I focused on it, clinging to it like a lifeline, and slowly, the weight on my shoulders began to lift. The whispers faded, the shadow retreating, and I found myself standing once more, staring into the empty, hollow eyes of the statues. I didn't know how, or why, but I was free. The shadow was gone, the grove silent once more. But I knew, deep down, that I hadn't escaped. The shadow was still there, lurking in the trees, waiting, watching, its presence a dark stain that clung to the air like a shroud. And as I turned to leave, a final whisper drifted through the silence, chilling me to the bone. "You will return." Part 5. The Mark. The walk back was a blur. My body felt like lead, every step draining more strength, each breath thinner than the last. But the whispers were gone. The air was silent, and I felt a hollow relief as I stepped out of the grove, the twisted trees shrinking behind me. When I reached home, my mother was sitting on the porch. Her face changed the moment she saw me, a look of dread flickering in her eyes. She didn't ask where I'd been. She just stared, searching my face as if she saw something there that she'd hoped never to see. I tried to shake off the encounter, to bury the memory beneath the mundane routines of everyday life. But the shadow lingered, a dark presence I could feel hovering at the edge of my mind, watching, waiting. And then the dreams started. Every night, I found myself back in the grove, wandering through rows of statues that stretched endlessly into the dark. The whispers were louder, clearer, and I could hear the words, "Now please for mercy," cries of despair, each voice a dark thread weaving through my mind. In my dreams, I'd see the shadow, watching me with its hollow, eyeless gaze, and when I woke, the memory of its touch lingered, cold and suffocating. But it wasn't just the dreams. Strange things began happening, small, almost imperceptible changes that built slowly, one upon another, until I could no longer ignore them. I'd find dirt under my fingernails, bits of moss clinging to my clothes, as if I'd been wandering through the grove in my sleep. Shadows seemed darker, denser, stretching long across my room at night, flickering in the corners of my vision. And sometimes, in the dead of night, I'd hear a faint whisper, just a single word, a name I couldn't quite catch, echoing through the silence. But the worst was the mark. It appeared a week after I'd left the grove, a small dark stain on the palm of my left hand. At first, I thought it was dirt, but no matter how much I scrubbed, it wouldn't come off. It spread slowly, a dark, twisting pattern that snaked up my wrist, like roots burrowing into my skin. I could feel it growing, a cold ache that pulsed with a life of its own, and I knew, deep down, that it was a part of the grove, a piece of that dark place that had latched onto me, refusing to let go. One night, as I lay in bed, staring at the mark, I heard the whisper again, closer this time, A soft voice that slipped through the darkness like a shadow. "You will return," it said. The words filled me with a cold dread, a certainty that I was bound to that place, that the shadow had claimed me. No matter how far I ran, no matter how hard I tried to forget, the grove would always be there, calling to me, pulling me back into its dark embrace. I tried to resist. I fought the pull with everything I had, clinging to the remnants of my life, but it was no use. The dreams grew more vivid, the marks spreading further up my arm, and the whispers became a constant presence, a dark undercurrent that followed me wherever I went. I couldn't escape it. It was inside me, a part of me, and the more I fought, the stronger it became. And then, one night, I couldn't fight anymore. The moon was full, casting a pale light across the trees, illuminating the path that led to the grove. I walked in silence, my steps steady, my body moving of its own accord, as if something else were guiding me. The air grew colder as I entered the grove, the shadows thicker, pressing against me like a dark, suffocating fog. I could feel the statues watching me, their hollow eyes following my every step, and the whispers rose around me, a chorus of voices that echoed through the silence. In the heart of the grove, the large statue waited, its arms outstretched, its eyes fixed on me with a look of dark, knowing hunger. I felt the mark on my arm pulsing, growing warmer, and I knew, with a sickening certainty, that I was home. The shadows closed in around me, the voices rising in a dark symphony, and I felt the cold touch of the shadow slipping into me, wrapping itself around my mind, my soul, binding me to the grove. And then, in a voice that was both a whisper and a scream, it spoke. "You belong to us now." The darkness swallowed me, the grove closing around me like a cage, and in that moment, I knew that I would never leave. The grove had claimed me, as it had claimed so many before, and as it would claim so many after. And in the silence that followed, in the cold, dark embrace of the shadows, I felt a strange, twisted peace. I was a part of the grove now, a part of its darkness, its sorrow. And as the shadows settled around me, as the voices faded into silence, I closed my eyes, surrendering to the darkness. I had found my place, my purpose, in the heart of the grove, and as the last of the light faded, I whispered my final words to the night. "I am home."